Class 10. This is Lara Mulvaney. Glad to be with you for the outreach presentation. You and I met during the GIS session, and I'm a Master Watershed Steward with class number 1. So today we're going to talk about outreach and engaging your community. And this is going to be in a little bit of 2 parts. This is going to be about general outreach, and then just some tips and tricks of how I have engaged my community and the best in the last almost 10 years as steward. Okay, so so the first part we're going to talk about is community events, and these are going to be required as part of your capstone project. So what is community, though? Community can be different things to different people. It could be your neighborhood, your school, your place of business, perhaps your congregation. So one of the options that you have for outreach events is to create a brand new event. And for some people, this is really exciting, and it does give you the opportunity to bring across a new idea, and it is dependent on you, so it's ultimately flexible in terms of where it's going to be held or the date or the time. And this way you can engage the community volunteers that you know and bring them all together in this new event. But there are some challenges because this is brand new, so that means the onus of all the event promotion, the event logistics, and all of that cost would be the responsibility of the steward. So an example of a brand new event was one held at St. Luke's Episcopal Church, where they started this Blue and Green Festival in support of a big restoration project, and it was hugely successful, but it did require quite a bit of work. And this was formatted to have free admission, and they accepted donations, and they had a raffle, and all the proceeds of that went to restoration projects. It was really a lovely event. It had live music, and they involved the animals and tours of the potential restoration project, and it really turned into an annual event. So some of the things that they had to consider when they were planning this unique, new event were, what is the mission of that? What kind of audience would they have for that event? Luckily, at St. Luke's, they had a venue, which was to use the church property. And then they had to work, of course, with the church to select a date, figure out what budget they would have, do all the recruiting for the volunteers, promote that event in as widely as possible, and then, of course, think about all the contingencies for weather and otherwise. Another new event was done by a steward who had a rain barrel campaign, a rain barrel kickoff day. She worked within her community to have a unique new event. So since rain barrels were identified as a strategy in her neighborhood on her neighborhood source assessment, she worked basically on her own property and with her neighbor to organize this simple event, which was focused on rain barrels. And so she had a demonstration about how to install a rain barrel, and she held a bulk rain barrel sale where she offered to sell rain barrels to neighbors. And then conveniently, there was a small restoration project located right next door to her, so she offered a tour of that as well. And that was an education event to talk about rain barrels and stormwater issues with the community. It was sort of an introduction to the stormwater problem. And it was easy for her for the logistics because it was right at her house. It was fairly simple on the budget side because she just offered some snacks, and WSA offered the sample rain barrels and all the printed material. And it was fairly easy for her to advertise. Alternatively, you could piggyback your community event on an existing event, so that's something that would already be happening in your community. So you could consider whether or not there would be a community fair in existence, a cleanup day, any sort of existing function at a congregation, or perhaps a school event. It might be a good idea to just tag along one of those. So the advantage of that is that you don't really have to plan for the event itself, except to show up with your own outreach materials. And since that event is probably already advertised, you would not have to deal with the promotion The challenges, of course, are that people coming to that event may not have any idea or any interest in environmental issues, and so your interaction with the public there would be fairly random. So an example of participation of stewards in already in a piggyback situation is the community fair in Linthicum, where two stewards just joined, you know, in there and set up a WSA information table at a community fair. All the promotion was handled by the Linthicum town. Very simple budget. So they had a large audience, and were able to give out a lot of information to a large number of people. Other events that were kind of playing along on existing kind of piggyback or a participation in the Green Expo. This is something I've done for about 10 years. WSA has had a presence also at the county fair and the Quiet Waters event. And there are a number of existing community events where WSA is asked to staff a table. So some tips in general for the events. WSA has a large quantity of, and variety of outreach materials that can be requested, and you can do that on the website or contact Tara, the outreach coordinator. And you want to do that at least a week ahead of time so that the office can prepare the materials and you're made aware of, what's available. And sometimes it's good to not have everything, but to pick sort of like a theme, like planting trees or just about rain gardens or just about conservation landscapes, for example. Some of the models that we have available for checkout, you will want to familiarize yourself with. For example, like the erosion model or the watershed model, need a little bit of setup and familiarization with the kind of lesson plan that goes with it. And it's good to set up a little bit ahead of time to orient yourself to the materials and the venue. Also, it's tiring a little bit to talk to people for long periods of time, so it's a good idea to have some partners, and you can trade off. And then, of course, as people sign up with questions or interest on the event sign-up sheet, you'll want to make sure that you follow up with those people and have a one-to-one, conversation. So now we're going to move to the second part of this presentation, which is really a more oriented towards my experience as a steward, and I hope to share with you some sort of stories of how you might better engage your neighbors. So these are my two dogs, Duke and Daisy, and they have really been my ambassadors to stewardship in my neighborhood, because my neighborhood is only 42 homes and mostly big lots. So having the dogs around has really helped me to be out in the neighborhood and see things and talk to my neighbors when I otherwise would not see issues or wouldn't hear my neighbors' concerns. So I would say, walk your dog in the neighborhood if you have one. It really opens your eyes to a lot of the things that are going on. And communication about what you're doing in the neighborhood is really key. This slide is here because if you look at the map image on the left, the green, the aqua-colored parcel is a large woodland area that I've been doing some invasive work in, and I tried to communicate that we were going to have goats in an electric fence in one area. And subsequently, on that same day, actually, a farmer neighbor's goats actually got out of their fence and were eating shrubbery of another neighbor down the road, and they thought it was the neighbors they thought it was the goats that we had hired. So anyway, it caused a big kerfuffle. So using any method that you can to communicate what you're doing, whether it's maps or emails or flyers or whatever, is really good to over communicate your strategies and your actions so that the most people get the information and that communication is clear. So in my neighborhood, having a plan to move forward was really important to gain support for funding and so forth. So strategically, we planned for a neighborhood assessment, and we also paid for a forestry stewardship plan to sort of guide our process moving forward. And the best results that I had were actually talking neighbor to neighbor. So that's easy in my neighborhood because we only have 42 neighbors. So that has worked very well. Preparing presentation for our annual meeting and laying out the planned events for the year at that annual meeting was also really important in success. And I personally found it was much better to be on the board of directors and be the head of the environmental committee to make the process of getting funding and convincing the board easier, because otherwise there was a whole nother layer of sort of red tape involved. So by being on the board, I was helping to really frame the decision making and get my agenda through. And we really have done some fun things in the neighborhood, and I think that's paramount to success, is making this fun. So we have done wine and vine events, which have been about an hour of invasive removal and about an hour or two of wine drinking. And then we did a campaign, Honey, I Shrunk the Lawn. Other than that, I've also been involved with this larger event in the community to bring awareness to environmental issues in my town of Davidsonville. So what worked for me, like I said before, is doing this neighbor to neighbor and really offering services on sort of a menu idea of a variety of things that me as a steward could help neighbors accomplish. And instead of bombarding people with information, just sort of strategically sending out information, maybe quarterly. I found also that just being helpful and being positive. And like I said, by walking the dog and seeing somebody engaging in a project and then gently offering information to solve a problem or to suggest some solutions which could help them save money or help them save time, and all the while helping to do something good for the environment, is really where you can get a foot in the door and be successful. And I found most people have some sort of angle, whether it's birds or aesthetics or wanting to mow less or whatever. And if you can figure out where that is and talk to them using your environmental concepts, stormwater concepts, and meet them where they are, that is really the best place to get started. So finding their angle is really important, and sometimes that might be money, that might be a matter of convenience of wildlife habit, of wildlife that they like, or how things look. Also, getting grants and awards or applying for grants for things and getting recognition is something that people feel proud about, and so that can sometimes really change people's minds. Most importantly, it's important to plan things that are fun for you and fun for the participants. So what really never works is going head to head with somebody when they don't agree with you. You can imagine that's just stressful. In my neighborhood, rain barrels really aren't a big sell because of the size of our roofs, so they tend to be overflow all the time. So that's not really something that I focus on. But if you have rooftops with areas that are 250 square feet or smaller, then rain barrels would be an ideal thing to suggest. Also, habits that people have about their yard care are just really hard to change. So what I suggest is people include things like invasive control as they would with lawn mowing, like do it every other week for 15 or 20 minutes instead of waiting until it's a problem and then having to do it for weeks and weeks and weeks on end. So in Gravely, in my neighborhood, I feel like we've had great successes. So the one-on-one relationships where I've engaged neighbors to participate in tree plantings, install rain barrels, put in conservation landscapes, and just the sheer number of different neighbors that have helped over the years in different projects, I would say has been a success. My greatest campaign, the Honey, I Shrunk the Lawn, engaged about 5 different neighbors to do fairly substantial projects, so that was fun and campaign based. That really worked. We routinely have the wine and vine events annually, and those are um, events that people really look forward to. And I think to start off, the main, I'd say, the step that really set us on the road to success was the forest stewardship plan, which we hired, contracted to do, because that really gave us a guiding document for um, moving forward with a plan on woodland health and so forth. And lastly, the community event of the Green Expo has been wildly successful in the area, and I've been glad to be part of that. So over the years, I think I've learned a lot of lessons. Um, to just uh, be flexible and expect that things aren't going to always turn out the way you expected. If you're in this for the long haul, to just find a comfort level, a few projects a year that you think you can manage, and go with that, because it's very easy to get pulled in many different directions. Um, uh, a great lesson taught to me by someone in WSA was that you really have to teach. You have to tell somebody about something 6 times before they remember it. So don't get discouraged and just keep passing along the information. Um, One idea about meeting people where they're at is to use counseling language. So instead of saying you should do something, you could try the language that says, some people I know have, reduced their lawn by sheet mulching. So instead of you should really have a rain barrel, you could say, uh, some neighbors down the street have used rain barrels to water their garden. And I think lastly, if you're kind and you're helpful, and you are guided by your conviction, you can really, really make a difference. So thank you for all you're doing, and good luck with your outreach events.